Well, welcome to Faith Roots, to our podcast, and I'm joined today by Ryan Burton King. Ryan is a pastor in London, but I've been talking to him a bit and sharing things from him over the past few days and weeks, as Ryan's got family connections and church connections into Ukraine, and he's been sharing how we can pray for what is happening there. So I just wanted to ask you, Ryan, just to tell us a bit about yourself and your family and how you ended up with links to Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Dave. I really appreciate your kindness in inviting me on, and I hope that my contributions will in no way be a disservice to your podcast. So my history with Ukraine goes back a ways. I mean, I was generally interested in Ukraine even as early as the 90s. I remember my father, who was active in church planter training in Russia, also at one stage trying to get to Ukraine. He had a number of seminars he was running in Russia as well as in Belarus. But in the providence of God, Ukraine never quite happened for one reason or the next. I remember taking some interest in what was going on in 2004 with the revolution that year. And then 2013, I was doing a project for just a sort of a grassroots gathering of believers who were seeking to identify areas of need vis-a-vis church planting, leadership training across the European continent, and was tasked with 500 cities. That was whittled down to 250, but 250 European cities and of a certain population size, and basically looking for opportunities, seeing what's happening on the ground, what is being done, and what needs to be done. Through that, I came into contact with a good number of Ukrainian brothers, pastors, and church planters in Ukraine. And one thing led to the next, and I was planning a conference for some people in Western Ukraine, a city called Ternopil. It's interesting, when I was telling people about Ternopil, many people not at all familiar with Ukraine at all thought I was saying something else. They thought I was saying Chernobyl. And so when I was saying I was planning a conference in Ternopil, I kept getting comments like, "Oh, you like to live on the wild side." And always, I ended up actually saying the name of the city wrong, so that I wouldn't get over explanation. But it's a city in Western Ukraine. So I was not even going to attend. I was not even going to be speaking. I was just sorting out the planning and the administration side of things for the church there, as well as a team of people from the UK. In the providence of God, one of the speakers was unable to go to that conference and was not going to be able to speak at it. So I was asked by the team if I would go instead. And there was speaking on evangelism, and 3 rows from the front, diligently listening and taking notes, was the woman that I now call my wife of over 5 years. So just praise God for just over that period of time, developing ministry connections, and of course through marriage relationships in Ukraine.
And so you have family. So your father-in-law is a pastor in the west of Ukraine.
That's correct. He's in the Midwest of Ukraine, a city called Khmelnytsky. It is to the west of Kyiv and to the east of Lviv. He is pastor of House of the Gospel Church, which is the Central Baptist Church in that city.
Yeah.
but is also within their denominational structures what they call an oblast pastor, an oblast being equivalent to our counties. So if you were to have a pastor of pastors within a sizable chunk of the UK, say East Anglia or something like that. So he ministers to churches without pastors and to pastors themselves in that role.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. And what's the situation like? That's to the west, so that's currently away from where the worst of the fighting's been reported. Are they currently peaceful, or is there has it got that far yet? What's the situation for them?
By and large, it is peaceful in their city. From day one, there has been shelling, bombing of a base just 20 miles north of them, though. So
it's very close.
Very close. They have become accustomed to flyovers, the sound of flyovers from Russian planes. Of course, in the distance, the bombing of that place. It is a military town, and there are a number of bases around it. So that said, the city itself has functioned more as a place of respite for refugees fleeing west.
I guess there's quite a few people coming through. Yeah. Are the church able to sort of help and sort of respond?
That's right. Yeah, they have upwards to 150 people a night that they're feeding and housing en route west. Families going west, and normally what's happening is men are taking their families west, kissing them goodbye at the border, and then going back east to fight. And so they get to minister to them both times. It's very much sort of a central stopping place for that route. So they're ministering to families headed west and men headed east.
Yeah. And I think one of the first things that you mentioned as the conflict started was your sister-in-law, Aricia, and she was in Kyiv, wasn't she, at the start? So you want to tell us a bit about her story and tell us again sort of what her experience was. I know she's a believer, isn't she? And you can tell us about what's happened, where she's sort of got to.
Fantastic, thank you. So Aricia was in Kyiv. She was in the city, but to the west, and very close. If you've seen in the news photographs of a street that's just clogged up with shelled out Russian metal, basically, the trucks and the tanks and all of that. It's a place called Bucha. And just outside of that is Hostomel Airport. Those two places have been real centers of fighting, and she was not far at all from all of that. So
I think you said that this was where, so there's that particularly brutal and feared Chechen battalion attacked.
Absolutely. So the first day was Thursday. So all throughout Thursday, there was great turmoil. I think great confusion. No one expected it of this scale, except certain intelligence authorities, but they've so discredited themselves in the past. No one believed Kyiv being sacked. Unbelievable.
And I think there was always that I know I wrote a few weeks back and said, that all of the logic, I think, as well, pointed against this, didn't it? That
totally.
You looked at where Putin's declared sort of long-term aims have been. It seemed to be the last thing that my expectation was, that there was going to be this ongoing kind of cat and mouse. It would make sense for him to keep trying to disrupt and unnerve Ukraine to get a change of regime there, to mess with sort of the minds of the West. So it was, I think, a big shock for most of us. I think even you got the sense that even the intelligence community was saying this is likely, but they were also kind of expecting it to be a bluff and that kind of thing. So
Definitely. And so my sister-in-law Aricia she was in the epicenter of fighting that first day, and she texted us that night that she had been really just the whole day had passed in a very surreal sort of way. And of course, there was real anxiety and fear. It was not the sort of situation where she could get out of Kyiv safely. And it was not really the sort of place where she could get to a shelter, a bomb shelter safely. They were potentially more dangerous than where she was in her flat. So long as she had a couple of layers of wall between her and what was happening outside, she felt that she should be reasonably safe. So she was quite anxious. She commented how she's rooming with an unbeliever, and it just came to her that this is her time to be a witness to this person, Anya, and not to cower, but to pray and to be a witness of faith. And so she went and prayed with Anya. Anya had not prayed before, and it was a very unusual experience for Anya. But Aricia was keen and continues to be keen to minister to this woman, and to be a witness to her through this turmoil. So that was Thursday. Friday, more of the same. It was actually calmer. We really thought that they were going to be much worse Friday night than they had been throughout the Thursday, but things sort of, found a pace, I guess. Saturday, we called and we had a video call, and she seemed very calm, very at peace, just remarkably so. And yet there was very much in the news this concern that they were sending in Chechen mercenaries. And the Chechens are known, this particular unit, particularly for their cruelty, for their suicidal zeal. They have a way in which they've married up their, political warmongering with Islamic fundamentalism, so they can serve Putin and get paid and die for Allah and go to paradise. And so it's that kind of mentality that they were bringing to it. Of course, the media here was filled with images of them performing a prayer ritual in the woods just outside of where my sister-in-law was. So there was a lot of concern. What does this look like? So she was prayerful, continued to be prayerful about it. And one of the things that my wife and I, her name is Uliana, Uliana and I have learned through this experience is really and truly the meaning of his mercies are new every morning, because we go to bed absolutely exhausted, and God does give us sleep, which is remarkable. But when we go to bed under that cloud of what could happen. When we awaken, will cities that we know and love have fallen to the enemy? Will people we love no longer be alive? What news will we awaken to? And in the mercy of God, we've awakened every day to mercy. And Sunday, bad news for the Chechen mercenaries, I'm afraid, but very good news for us. That unit had been completely routed. Their warlord was slain. And increasingly, the Russian army was looking quite toothless against the might of a comparably a weak nation and military. Truly fascinating. So we do give God praise because in the end, Aricia was able to make it out safely Tuesday night after far far longer than we were comfortable with. But she made it out Tuesday night with Anya, made it to Lviv, and they have since made it to Brussels. And she's very intent on continuing to care for her roommate and to be a good witness to her. We value ongoing prayer for Arissa and her roommate Anya.
Definitely will. Yeah, that's incredible to hear of her ongoing desire to be a witness and to love and care for others. Now, I think it's sort of interesting. You talk very sort of openly about the enemy, and obviously a sense of kith and kindred and identity. I think it struck me that we've probably seen a level of language that I think, particularly in Britain, now other countries may be different. I think the state's slightly sort of different in terms of recent memory, but I think in terms of Britain and the church, even though there's been sort of times of conflict, I think the language where there's this sense of there is an immediate enemy that we were talking those terms about is something we've probably not experienced, I guess, since the end of the Cold War and the de-escalation and eventual peace in Northern Ireland. So there's not been that sense of here's an enemy, and so we're probably not used to talking in those kinds of terms, and also, I guess as well, the sort of the dominant culture, both inside and outside of the church, would struggle to talk about war and conflict and sides and that kind of thing. So you hear about, I think you talked about Arissa learning to make Molotov cocktails, and that just blows our mind, that kind of situation.
Oh, yeah. 22-year-old Christian woman was.
Yeah, and I know you got some. I mean, you got some kickback as well, didn't you, for this? People saying that you shouldn't, as a pastor, effectively, take sides or speak on the sort of the politics of this. I wanted to just spend a bit of time helping us to think about how we engage with earthly conflict and politics and that. What is it that motivates you to speak in that kind of terms, to say there are sides? And as Christians, as pastors, do we have permission to do that?
It's an excellent question. I would say quite strongly, to start with your last question, as pastors, do we have permission to do that? Absolutely. We should do so responsibly. We should do so carefully. But we should do so. And I think one of the irritations for me has been pastors who are too careful on this. And one might say, well, you can't be too careful. I think you can. If you are refusing to take a side, if you're engaged in whataboutism or both sidesism, I've seen a lot of that, both of those, so well, what about this? What about that? What about, Ukraine has problems with corruption. Ukraine has, and so okay. Yeah. We have,
and ironically, a lot of that seemed to play into. I think a lot of that kind of thing seemed to actually play into people's existing. So whilst I say don't be political on this, don't take sides, be neutral. A lot of it played into existing political opinions. So opinions that people had about NATO or the European Union and those kind of things seem to sort of fit into that as well, didn't they?
Absolutely. People have brought all sorts of baggage, pre-existing biases and prejudices and ideas to the table that have colored this. And unfortunately, I think some have become so tribal that they have to be consistent with their tribe at all costs. And there's another tendency that has developed. Certainly, it was already developing pre-COVID, but it really went into overdrive during COVID, a grasping for alternative narratives. And unfortunately, in this situation, the alternative narrative is one of Russian propaganda. And for decades, anyone who knows history, history is my hobby. It's my passion, my interest. I love history. Anyone who knows history knows that Russia has been, and the USSR before it was, a master of disinformation, and have become very skilled at that, at manipulating people through various forms of media with great confidence, and just brazen lies, total fictions circulated as truth. Sometimes there will be enough truth that's verifiable, that is employed in service of a bigger lie. And so a little proof, someone looks at that, here's some evidence of it. Oh, wow. So then they just believe everything. It's bait. It's like, the lure on the hook to catch the fish. That's exactly.
Yeah. I think we saw, there was a very sort of recent example of that. One of my concerns has been the way that an entire people can get demonized by the actions of their leaders, and I guess one real danger is the kind of risk of a siege mentality into Russia, and us and them with the Russian people themselves. Is it just someone said, I made comments about this, and then someone sent me some images just the other day showing Russian people with the Z sign, which is showing their allegiance to Putin, and sort of a thread of someone saying people are doing this willingly. And it kind of struck me that, of course, there's a kernel of truth in there, that there will be lots of people in Russia who, there will be people who will be ideologically motivated to support Putin. Absolutely. There will be others who will only be hearing his propaganda. I think it's going to actually get harder and harder, isn't it, for us to know what ordinary Russians are thinking, because those are the images that Putin will want us to see.
We don't exactly.
My people supporting me.
Exactly. We don't, even when statistics come out, like 70% of the Russian population supports what is happening in Ukraine. That's or videos of people being approached in the street and saying, they support Russia, they support Putin. There's all sorts of content out there, and sifting through that, it is very challenging to know what to believe and if this is accurate or not. What is the case is that for a good couple of decades, Putin has been very popular in Russia, and from the very beginning, this sort of anti and independent Ukraine has been a part of his ideology. And his bad behavior has been constantly enabled, both from within the country, but also the negligence of others without the country who have chosen to ally themselves with him. And we do have to ask, and I don't think it's extreme. I think this is a situation where we can start drawing parallels between Nazi Germany's behavior. I don't believe that is extreme, considering what we're seeing on the ground in Ukraine. He had massive support. People brainwashed or totally on side ideologically, massive support. And the images of these young people waving Russian flags and cheering with the Z on their chests, and seeing that suddenly develop a real popularity in Russia, does have echoes of these vast rallies in Nazi Germany. Of course, some of it is staged. There's much that is staged. Anything with a camera at one degree is,
Yeah.
But you can say no, and some are. Thousands of people have been arrested on the streets of Russia for protesting Putin and the war in Ukraine. And pastors are beginning to speak. I think Ukrainians for a long time wondered, why are you not speaking? It created a rift between Baptist Christians in Ukraine and in Russia, because the Ukrainians were, why are you not speaking out more about this? As a prophetic witness, they actually had to call a summit of their leaders to work through those issues, and did in the end come to a place of greater understanding as to the persecution Christians, evangelical Christians, were under in Russia, and the challenges, the difficulties making political commentary would cause. I think that's very kind and gracious of the Ukrainian brothers, and I must say, I know I'm saying this from a position of relative safety, but someone has to take a stand sometime.
Yeah.
And when civilians are being bombed in their houses and in their schools and kindergartens, when 3 or 4 times a ceasefire is agreed, and the routes through which people are traveling are specifically targeted, when a green zone is formed and it's only to Russia. It's not. It's not
Russia
to Ukrainian territories or Ukraine-friendly territories, but to Russia. But nonetheless, okay, so long as our people are able to get out safe, and then the road is paved with landmines, we're dealing with evil.
Yeah,
we have to speak to that. Ukraine is a complex country. Ukraine has all manner of political complexities and various situations that someone could seize upon and say, "Oh, look at this, look at that." So too does the UK. So too does the USA. How would we feel if France started bombing the UK because of our history of imperialism? How would we feel if Canada started bombing the USA because of its history of racism and ongoing issues with that?
Yeah. I wonder if, even on a sort of if we take it on a even smaller scale, I think the comparison to because what we're dealing with is a bully and an abuser on a global scale. So, we sadly see situations in our churches of families where there's an abuser. We've sadly seen churches where there's been abusive, bullying leaders. And, I think in those situations, we would consider it completely inappropriate to say, let's stop and talk about all the things that the victims have done wrong. All of you, let's talk about your sin now. Of course, they are sinners. Of course, there are places where they will need to repent and come to Christ. And of course, you can look and say there are situations where you're frustrated and think a victim's got themselves into a dangerous situation. But at the point where they're being bullied and abused, you say it's the abuser that did that. He is the one who is doing evil, and that's what needs to be challenged and stopped here. I guess it's.
I think that's a very effective analogy. That's a very effective analogy, because Putin's language is classic abuser language. I mean, we're seeing the DARVO acronym worked out in his behavior, where he denies the accusations completely and deflects. He accuses those who are he attacks those who are accusing him, and then he reverses the roles of victim and offender. And it's just astonishing, breathtaking stuff. And those who are coming to his defense or who are circulating Russian propaganda are very much those who, in incidents of abuse, rape, what was she wearing? Abuse. Well, what did she say that made him hit her? Things like that. and some of the language when it comes to ministering to hurting Ukrainian people through this season has been something of the European equivalent, a white European equivalent of saying all lives matter to someone who is saying Black Lives Matter, to console and show solidarity with those facing racial oppression. So there's a lot of parallels if you look at things on the micro level, interpersonally with matters of abuse and racism that we see at this global scale as a classic abuser is absolutely hammering a sovereign independent nation, yes, with its flaws, but ultimately my experience, my research, my study, my knowledge of them, a peace-loving people who do not want this. And they're not retaliating. It's not like they're flying into Russia now, bombing the daylights out of Russian cities. They want peace. They're not retaliating across Russian borders at this point. In fact, by the rules of war, we might say would be justified to do so. But they are not. They're simply saying, Putin, go home.
Yeah.
And so it's a very sad thing to see.
In terms of, I think we've seen that, Ukraine has been significant in terms of the gospel, that sense of, I think it's been described by some as effectively being the Bible Belt of Eastern Europe and into the old sort of Soviet sort of area with gospel growth, with missionaries going out, with church planting. I think for a lot of us, it's been the sense of there is this spiritual dimension that we can talk in terms of a spiritual warfare here, that the enemy would love to see the church silenced, to see Christians killed, scattered, the places where they meet bombed. I think it'd be good for you to speak into what we are seeing in terms of what is God doing in terms of that spiritual conflict, and how can we pray into that?
That's a powerful question. I really believe that what we are seeing is, as ever, Satan overreaching. He always crosses the line in the most bizarre ways. And so we can talk about Putin's strategy just seeming irrational. But if this is an effort to crush the church, I don't see it working out that way. I was at a rally Saturday at Trafalgar Square, and I heard one of the main organizers urging people to pray for Ukraine. And he started chanting, pray for Ukraine, pray for Ukraine. And he started talking about various ways in which God was answering prayer, and things like missiles just blowing up in the sky, disappearing and no one knowing what happened to them. So real verifiable incidents of soldiers just inexplicably abandoning their camps, leaving all of the equipment, all sorts of things happen of a truly amazing nature. The sea, the Black Sea, just off of Odessa, churning with storms and waves, preventing land invasion, all of this stuff. And it's really exciting to see, really amazing. And I just hadn't thought that I would see in Trafalgar Square, thousands of people chanting, pray for Ukraine, in a secular society that scoffs at prayer. I find that fascinating. But on the ground in Ukraine, churches are rising to the need of the moment. Men between the age of 18 and 60 cannot leave the country. They cannot evacuate. So pastors, including my father-in-law, they're going to the local commanding officer, and they're reporting for duty, as it were. And well, they're pastors, and they're actually respected as needed on the ground to coordinate relief efforts and to instill hope within the people. And so thank you for your offer, but your services are better used elsewhere within the church, and they're seeing that. Communities that are looking and seeing the church active on the ground, whether it be in my father-in-law's church in the Midwest, in places like Lenitsky, or places that have actually been ravaged by bombings like Irpin. And the Ukraine will remember that. They will remember that evangelical men and women of conscience stayed and served their communities in their darkest hour. That will be very powerful and compelling witness. But what about those who have fled? Is that a bad thing? Is that cowardice? No, it's quite natural. It's safe. In many ways, it's wise if they can do. But Ukrainian believers are going to take the gospel with them wherever they go. And they've often been restrained from traveling outside of Ukraine. Yeah. Now the borders are open all across, and they can freely travel. The trains and the buses are free to Ukrainian refugees. They're going all over the place, wherever they want, getting involved in local churches, connecting with, whether it be Ukrainians or other people all across Europe.
Yeah.
You remember in the book of Acts when persecution stirs up against the church in Jerusalem, and Saul, breathing out threatenings and slaughter, raises people up against the church in Jerusalem. And so they scatter, and the language of scattering is there. But in their scattering, they fulfilled the ascension promise of the Lord Jesus Christ. You will be my witnesses in Judea, Jerusalem, and in Judea and in Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the world. Through that scattering, you have people going to North Africa, all across Asia Minor and the Middle East, and into Europe. And so what we're seeing is something I believe that has the potential to be of that scale as our Ukrainian brothers and sisters are dispersed. But you cannot disperse faith in people's hearts. You can't, you can disperse gospel believing people, but by dispersing gospel believing people, you only dispense the gospel. It's given out all across the place. So exciting to see that. And the levels of partnership between churches on the continent as they come together and work together to meet these needs also, I think, bodes well for gospel's partnership across the continent, whereas people may previously have been more insular or tribal.
Yeah. And it seems to be moving people to pray. I think there was a prayer event that Krish Kandaya was involved with, that there was, over 1,000 people involved in that same sort of days, the prayer and fasting last week. Lots of people praying who, and I think learning to pray earnestly, I know it's been my experience, hearing from others, that challenge of, that we've been caused to pray in desperation and to passionately cry out to God, and that challenge of when was the last time that we did that for the gospel? When was it that we last did that for our neighbours here? And if that moves us to become more earnest in our prayer, particularly as we are so vividly, so powerfully, so clearly sort of seeing those prayers being answered, that should stir us up further, shouldn't it?
Absolutely. I had a meeting last Thursday night, our weekly prayer meeting, and 1 hour before, I got a phone call from a neighbor down the road. I remember some years ago him telling me that he was basically an atheist, Irish man, disillusioned with the politicization of both Roman Catholicism and Protestantism. If he was on a side, he would have been on the Roman Catholic side of things, but just totally put off by that, understandably so. The tragedy, though, of course, not just being put off of politicized religiosity, but being put off of God, of faith, of Christ, of healthy local churches that are seeking to love and serve their neighbors. That's a tragedy. He called me, and man of few words, even fewer that I can understand. And he said, "Are you meeting? Are you around?" And I said, "Yes." "Are you meeting tonight?" "Absolutely. Thursday night, we always have our weekly prayer meeting. So you'll be praying tonight?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely." And he said of him and his wife, "Would we be welcome?"
Oh.
"Absolutely." "Would it be okay if I cross the road and knock at another neighbor we know at her house and ask her to come along?" And I said, "Of course." They were the first ones there after me. And what drew them out wasn't that I had advertised anything, wasn't that we had posted anything. In fact, the plan for the prayer, I changed with an hour's notice, the plan for the prayer meeting somewhat, because I knew they would be there. And I wanted to lean into that. And I think that God is doing stuff in our communities. I've seen him already do it through COVID. And I believe he's now doing something through this as people come more and more face to face with their mortality, but also with the promises of God, both of judgment and of grace. And
Well, thank you, Ryan. Could you maybe just give us 3 specific things that we can be praying for through today and this week, and then we'll finish there.
Thanks, Dave. Yes, just generally continue to pray for the churches across Ukraine. Before all of this, they existed in a state of great need. They were faithful with what they had, but many of them serve in relative poverty and real reliance on external support at times. It is quite challenging. My father-in-law's church tore through their entire evangelism budget, summer outreach and camps budget to rise to meet this need. And they're not alone. So pray that God would provide for their needs and sustain them. If you can, find local churches. Charities are getting a lot of money, millions. Local churches that you or people in your networks are attached to, and find out how you can get support to them. But pray for them that God would help them. Also continue to pray, yes, for peace. We must pray for peace. But we must also be realistic. Something that we're uncomfortable with often in the British church environment is Psalm 144, I believe, that says God teaches our hands to war and our fingers to battle. And we're uncomfortable with the realities of warfare. Rightly so. We shouldn't be comfortable with it. But the way to peace now is through war. It is through conflict. We must pray that God would do his righteousness, his justice through this. We know that God is against oppression, and he is against the proud. And so we can pray against. Yes, we can and should pray for Putin's salvation. But if that's not the will of the Lord, it is okay to pray that God would stay his hand, that God would strike him down. Those are biblical prayers. And that God would uphold the Ukrainian government. I've been praying for Zelensky, President Zelensky, openly, a Jewish man. And I've been praying that he would come to know friendship with God through one other than Abraham, and that he would come to know the ultimate son of David in his life. So I'm praying for President Zelensky's salvation and for his strength, his preservation through a truly horrific time.
Thank you. So we will be praying on for those things. Thank you for joining us. Please keep, as much as you're able to, communication gets disrupted, but please keep telling family, friends, those you know how much we here in the churches here are holding them in our hearts and praying for them, and let them know of our love and care as well. Thank you.